Let's decode Julia Kristeva, born in 1941, a Bulgarian-born French psychoanalyst, critic, novelist, and one of the most influential figures in modern theory. Kristeva is central to both structuralist and post-structuralist thought, and her work shaped linguistics, semiotics, psychoanalysis, and feminist philosophy. Now, pause here because this has been asked in exam. When she moved to Paris, Kristeva entered a powerful intellectual circle. She worked with Roland Barthes and Claude Lévi-Strauss, and she absorbed ideas from Jacques Lacan, Michel Foucault, and Mikhail Bakhtin. What makes her unique is how she fused all these voices into her own system. Her career has two phases. First, an early focus on structuralist linguistics and semiotics, and second, a later psychoanalytic and feminist turn where she brought back the body and subjectivity into theory. Now, at the heart of her early work, especially Desire in Language and La Révolution du Langage Poétique, is the idea of the semiotic. Pause here and note this, it was asked in exam. The semiotic is a dimension of language tied to rhythm, slippage, displacement, and even the unconscious. It resists fixed rules. In contrast, we have the symbolic order, the rational, rule-bound system tied to patriarchal authority. The semiotic breaks open that rigidity and destabilizes linguistic structures. But where does this semiotic energy come from? Kristeva explains it through the concept of the chora. Borrowed from Plato but completely reimagined by Kristeva, the chora is a pre-linguistic bodily space of drives and impulses. This too was asked in exam. It has no fixed identity, no stable meaning. Think of it as a restless undercurrent beneath language, always shifting and refusing to be pinned down. In her later work, Kristeva turned toward psychoanalysis and feminism, developing the idea of the speaking body. She argued that traditional theories of language ignored the body, ignored emotions, and ignored desire. By bringing the body back into discourse, she challenged patriarchal rationality and offered a new feminist model of thought. Can you recall the key takeaway? Kristeva bridges the structuralist love of system with the post-structuralist insistence on instability. She shows us that meaning is never stable. It flows between the body and culture, between the semiotic and the symbolic. That's why her theories continue to influence linguistics, psychoanalysis, and feminist philosophy even today. Let's decode Julia Kristeva's Semioticae. Published in 1969, a work that marked her entry into literary theory and psychoanalysis. Unlike Ferdinand de Saussure's semiotics, which mainly studied language as a system of science, Kristeva expanded the field by adding something new, the psychoanalytic dimension. And this point was asked in exam. For her, meaning isn't just about words and grammar. It's also about the body, about drives, rhythms, and emotions. Pause here and note this down. Kristeva introduces a dual framework, the semiotic and the symbolic. These two aren't separate worlds. They're inseparable, but distinct forces within language. The symbolic is the structured side, the rules of language, the social order, rational communication. If you know Lacan, you'll recall that he connects this with the paternal law, the authority of structure. But the semiotic that's where things get exciting. It refers to the pre-linguistic energies, the rhythms and flows that disturb the rigid order of language. To explain this, Kristeva borrows the concept of the chora from Plato. Can you recall this? It was asked in exam. The chora is a kind of pre-symbolic space, a fluid, undifferentiated zone filled with movement and drives. It belongs to the infant before the mirror stage, before the child becomes a stable subject, its energy without form, always resisting the fixed laws of language. Kristeva doesn't stop at linguistics. In Semioticae, she also coins another key term that was asked in exam, intertextuality. This is the idea that no text stands alone. Every text is a mosaic of prior texts, absorbing, reshaping, and transforming what came before it. When you read a novel or a poem, you're really entering into a conversation of countless voices from the past. And And Kristeva's reach is wide. Her analyses go into literature, art, politics, psychoanalysis, even questions of abjection and desire. What she keeps stressing is that stable meaning is always disrupted by forces underneath, by the interplay of semiotic energies with symbolic law. So pause again and let this sink in. For Kristeva, subjectivity itself, the very idea of who we are, is never fixed. It's formed in this tension between the semiotic and the symbolic, between drives and language, between body and culture. That's why Semiotique remains such a revolutionary text. It places the body and affect at the very center of how meaning and culture are made. Let's decode Julia Kristeva, one of the most influential voices of late 20th century theory. In the late 1960s, drawing on Michel Foucault's ideas of dialogism and carnival, she introduced the term intertextuality. And yes, this was asked in exam. Pause here and note this down. Kristeva challenges the idea that a text is self-contained or purely original. Instead, she argues that every text is an intertext, a place where countless other texts intersect. Meaning doesn't spring fresh from a single author's mind, it emerges through citations, allusions, echoes, and transformations. Think of it like this. Each text is a woven fabric, stitched together with threads from many others. This is exactly what Roland Barthes meant when he called the text a tissue of quotations. And Derrida's bold claim, there is nothing outside the text, also resonates here. Together, they remind us that meaning is not fixed, but endlessly produced in relation to other meanings. Now here's the golden trick. Intertextuality dismantles the idea of a singular, closed literary work. Instead, it places every text within an infinite cultural and historical network. So when you interpret a text, you're really tracing its conversations with countless others. But Kristeva goes even further with her psychoanalytic concept of the chora, a term she borrows and reworks from Plato's Timaeus, and this was also asked in exam. In Plato, hora is a kind of receptacle or space that receives forms but does not itself possess them. Kristeva adapts this idea to describe the pre-symbolic, pre-linguistic state underlying language. She calls it a space of rhythms, drives, and movements that cannot be locked into fixed meaning. As she explains, the chora can be designated and regulated, but it can never be definitively posited. Can you see the twist here? The chora represents what she calls the semiotic dimension of language, which constantly disrupts the rational, rule-bound symbolic order. In other words, language is never stable. It is always stirred by these deep bodily energies that destabilize and reshape meaning. So, by linking intertextuality with the chora, Kristeva shows us that texts are never closed systems and meaning is never final. It is always dynamic, plural, and embodied, always resisting neat closure. And that's what makes her theory so powerful in both structuralist and post-structuralist thought. Let's decode the fascinating journey of Tzvetan Todorov, a Bulgarian-born French historian, philosopher, and literary critic. He became one of the key voices in the structuralist and post-structuralist debates of the 20th century, and over his career, he authored 39 books. Pause here and note this down. Among his most important works are The Typology of Detective Fiction, published in 1966, asked in exam, The Poetics of Prose in 1971, Introduction to Poetics in 1981, The Conquest of America, The Question of the Other in 1982, and Michel Foucault. The Dialogical Principle in 1984, asked in exam. Already you can see his wide range moving from literature to cultural history, always with a sharp eye on ethics and representation. Now, here's the golden trick. Todorov's most influential idea comes from his book Introduction à la littérature fantastique, translated as The Fantastic, a structural approach to a literary genre, published in 1970. In it, he gives us a very precise definition of the fantastic. He says, the fantastic lies in a moment of hesitation when either the reader or a character in the story confronts something that appears supernatural. The big question becomes, is this strange event just an illusion? Or is it truly a break in natural law? That hesitation, that uncertainty is the very heart of the fantastic. Can you recall the next step? If the strange event is later explained rationally, Todorov calls it the uncanny. But if it is accepted as supernatural, then it becomes the marvelous. So the fantastic is not about the ghost itself, but about the suspense created by not knowing whether the ghost is real. He illustrates this with Jacques Cazot's Le Diable Amoureux, a tale where the protagonist Alvaro must decide whether the woman he loves is truly human or perhaps the devil in disguise. This edge of doubt, this fragile threshold between the real and the unreal is what defines the fantastic. Pause here, this is a classic UGC NET trap, so be careful. Todorov isn't just classifying ghost stories, he's offering a structuralist framework that explains how literature generates meaning. His model shows us that genres, structures, and the act of reading itself are all about interpretation. Literature is not a fixed reflection of reality. It's a field where meaning emerges through patterns, categories, and the reader's engagement. Let's decode two important names you should never skip for your exam: Antony Easthope and Madan Sarup. Both of these scholars are directly connected with post-structuralist thought, and their names have been asked in exam. So pause here and make a clear note of that. First, Antony Easthope. Born in 1939, he became a leading British literary theorist who worked across post-structuralism, psychoanalysis, film theory, and cultural studies. What makes him stand out is his insistence that popular culture deserves as much serious study as canonical literature. Imagine him putting Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness right next to Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes and saying both reveal cultural myths and unconscious desires. Deeply influenced by Freud and Lacan, Easthope explored how the unconscious shapes cultural texts. Some of his major works include Poetry as Discourse in 1983, The Masculine Myth in Popular Culture in 1986, British Post-Structuralism in 1988, and The Unconscious in 1999. His writings were sharp, sometimes controversial, but always influential in shifting literary studies toward ideology, desire, and culture. Easthope's name alone has been asked in exams, so even if you don't recall all his works under pressure, make sure you can identify him as a key post-structuralist voice. Next, Madan Sarup. Born in 1925, he taught at Goldsmiths College in London and is equally significant for students of post-structuralism. Sarup's special strength was making complex theories easy to understand. His book, An Introductory Guide to Post-Structuralism and Postmodernism, became a classic handbook for students struggling with Lacan, Foucault, Kristeva, Sixus, Irigaray, Lyotard, and Baudrillard. But Sarup wasn't limited to abstract theory, he also worked on education, identity, and cultural politics. He critiqued race, ethnicity, consumer culture, and post-colonial questions, while also writing on multiracial education and the political economy of schooling. Some of his key works include Marxism and Education, The Politics of Multiracial Education, Jacques Lacan, Identity, Culture and the Postmodern World, and his very popular Introductory Guide. And that wraps up Chapter 13, Post-Structuralism Unlocked. We've journeyed through the key thinkers Barthes, Foucault, Kristeva, Todorov, Easthope, and Sarup and seen how they reshaped our understanding of language, power, and meaning. Remember, these names have been asked in exams, so make sure you mark them in your notes. Everything you need is already ready for you. Lesson plan, videos, PDFs, PYQs, last-minute revision notes, classroom notes, and even diary notes, PDFs, all in one place. So, don't forget to download the app now and keep your preparation one step ahead.